Once we went into space to be part of a race so that people could walk on the moon. Many years have gone by, but again we will fly and return to the sky sometime soon. Can the kids of the earth reach the heavens? Could they answer the biggest of questions? Could they fly through the sky as the stars go by and reach for new worlds as they beckon? Could they fly through the sky as the stars go by and reach for new worlds as they beckon?
Hi, I'm Dr. Jim, a space scientist and a musician. Welcome to Space Quest, where we will be using stories and songs to talk about space with some visitors from the future. Do you think kids can go into space? Someday there could be a girl named Laura and a boy named Tommy with their own spaceships and robot companions who come back from the future to learn how space exploration began. I have a question for you. Do you think that there's a dark side of the moon? I'll let you think about that, and we'll get back to it at the end of the show. There might even be some clues along the way as we meet our time-traveling friends.
Hi, Dr. Jim. Good to see you again. And my friend Tommy says, hi.
Hi, Piper. It's good to see you again. How are things in the future?
Now, Dr. Jim, you know I can't tell you too much about the future, but Tommy and Laura are doing fine, along with their boss, Dr. Hans von Bodenheimer.
Hello, Dr. Jim. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Hello, Vista. Glad to hear that Laura is doing well. Does she miss you when you come to visit me on this show?
No, she and Tommy don't really notice when we are gone from them, since we step back to the future at the same instant that we left. For them, it's like no time has passed at all once we return to our state of normal matter.
Oh, that's right. You told me that you travel through time by briefly converting your whole spaceship into antimatter, since antiparticles experience time in the opposite direction. Hopefully, there are no strange side effects.
We're very careful how we do that, Dr. Jim, just to make sure there are no explosions. If antimatter meets regular matter, it can cause a very energetic reaction.
I can imagine. So you must be very careful to keep yourselves isolated during the time-traveling process.
Yes, Dr. Jim. When Laura and Tommy built the special spaceship that can travel through time, they gave it the ability to disappear from the regular universe just for that purpose. It returns as antimatter just in time to fly very close to the sun. It feels a bit strange when it happens, but one gets used to it.
That's amazing. I assume you must be very careful not to change anything in the past that you can see or hear.
We have ways to tell if changing history is going to be a problem, so we can stop ourselves before anything bad happens. I nearly had a time accident once, but we are learning more as we practice. Fortunately, I still have all of my parts, I think.
Well, that's good to hear, Piper. Now let's get started by talking about how robots were used to explore the moon before people went there. The first robot in orbit was a Russian satellite called Sputnik, which means fellow traveler. It was the first artificial satellite of the Earth, and it was launched in 1957. Sputnik got the attention of the world, and soon other robot satellites were put into orbit. They found that there is radiation in places around the Earth which we now call the Van Allen belts.
The records show that Dr. Van Allen was the one who suggested putting a radiation sensor on an early satellite, and the radiation belts are named after him.
Yes, exactly. People didn't know if there was too much radiation for astronauts to survive, so they used robots to find out first. Since there is no air in space, any sunlight that shines on a spacecraft will make it very hot, and anything in shadow is very cold. Robot satellites were used to try ways of handling these temperature changes.
We robots can do our missions in bitter cold or extreme heat.
Yes, Piper, robots don't need to eat or drink like the astronauts either. However, they do need electrical power to do their jobs. This electricity can come from batteries, solar panels, or even atomic power. Batteries don't last very long on their own, but solar panels can be used to recharge the batteries. There is a problem with solar panels, however.
What problem do you mean, Dr. Jim?
At the distance that the Earth is from the Sun, there is plenty of sunlight for the solar panels to work properly. However, the problem is that the light of the Sun becomes less bright as we move away from it. Mars is farther from the Sun than the Earth, but there is still enough sunlight on Mars for solar panels to provide power for robots like Spirit and Opportunity. The planet Jupiter is about as far as you can go from the Sun and still use solar panels to power spaceships. Saturn is about twice as far from the Sun as Jupiter, and at that distance the Sun is so dim that solar panels wouldn't really work. That's why we need atomic batteries.
Atomic batteries? That sounds really powerful and maybe dangerous.
Atomic batteries contain a lot of power, but they release it very slowly so that the batteries can last for many years. There's a famous robot space explorer called Voyager 1 that has been running on atomic batteries for more than 40 years. The secret power source is plutonium, an element that can stay naturally hot for a very long time, and the heat can be converted into electricity. Another famous robot that is powered by plutonium is Curiosity, a rover on Mars.
Tommy and Laura rescued Curiosity, which is how we found your name, Dr. Jim. We cross-referenced all of the signatures that were stored in the memory chips and found that you were a relative of Dr. Hans von Bodenheimer, the director of the Mars Museum. He's the one who asked Laura and Tommy to collect all of the Mars robots so they could find them and bring them back to the museum.
Yes, that's right. I signed the logbook for Curiosity as it was being assembled by NASA at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. I'm glad you were able to find my name and use it to come and visit me.
We have many more questions for you, Dr. Jim, and it's much easier to communicate with you in person. Otherwise, it takes a long time to exchange messages.
Yes, we have learned that the farther the robots go, the longer it takes to send and receive messages. We use radio to talk through space, and it moves at the speed of light, which can take hours to reach the outer limits of the solar system. Also, the signals get weaker over great distances, so they can't carry as much information.
Fascinating how space communication was so limited in the early days. This must have been quite a challenge to explore the farthest planets.
Yes, Vista, it really is a challenge. When a robot named New Horizons went to Pluto and beyond, it took many months before it finished sending back all of the pictures that it took. They were beautiful and unexpected, but people had to be very patient since it took so long to receive them. When New Horizons was launched, we didn't know what Pluto or its moon Charon really looked like. Now, robots have been to all the planets in our solar system and other objects as well.
You can always count on us robots, Dr. Jim.
Thank you, Piper. It seems that every time robots and people go somewhere new to explore, we're always surprised by what we find.
Discovering the unexpected is the whole point of space exploration, is it not?
That's very well said, Vista. Yes, the discovery of new things is indeed the point of exploration. But what if we are not the only explorers in the universe? Perhaps there might be other life out in space that could discover us, or at least some of our robot probes. That's why we put pictures and recordings of ourselves on Voyager robots and others. We even included instructions about how to play the golden record that's carried on the side of Voyager.
Are you talking about aliens? That sounds like there could be danger, Dr. Jim.
Well, not to worry. We have found no evidence of alien life so far, but we keep looking for it. Do you know if people find any alien life in the future?
That is one of the subjects we cannot discuss, since it could affect the future and endanger our own existence. All we can say is that Tommy and Laura have their own recording ready just in case.
Oh, okay. I understand. You need to be careful not to tell me too much. Would you like to hear a song about how the robots are the first ones to go out and explore space?
Yes, Dr. Jim.
Okay. This song is called The Robots Fly.
We send out the robots to be first into space. They get to set the pace and find a brand new place. The robots are clever and they don't need to eat. Their missions they complete in spite of cold or heat. Oh, the robots fly to the edge of the sky and look farther than we can see. They will learn so much when they finally touch the strange new worlds they might be first to see. The robots are powered by the light of the sun, and when that light is done, they use plutonium. We try to keep talking with them by radio, but talking gets real slow the farther that they go. Oh, the robots fly to the edge of the sky and look farther than we can see. They will learn so much when they finally touch the strange new worlds they might be first to see. The robots have greetings that they carry along with pictures and with songs and voices that are strong. They might come in contact with some life we could meet, some creatures they could greet that don't have hands or feet. Oh, the robots fly to the edge of the sky and look farther than we can see. They will learn so much when they finally touch the strange new worlds they might be first to see. If kids built the robots, could they play videos and carry funny shows to share them with who knows? If Tommy and Laura saved their stories to tell, their memories could dwell as robots bid farewell. Oh, the robots fly to the edge of the sky and look farther than we can see. They will learn so much when they finally touch the strange new worlds they might be first to see.
Welcome back, and remember our space question for today. Is there a dark side of the moon? Let's talk with Piper and Vista a bit more to see if we can find any clues.
When did the Apollo missions first get started?
In 1961, the United States President, John F. Kennedy, made a speech before Congress where he challenged our country to send a person to land on the moon and bring them back safely before the end of that decade. At the time of his speech, the Mercury program was already sending astronauts into space one at a time. Later, in preparation for Apollo, the Gemini capsules carried 2 astronauts at a time and also practiced docking with other spacecraft in orbit, something that would be required for the Apollo missions to the moon.
Docking 2 spaceships together in orbit sounds tricky, given how primitive the technology was at the time. Did anything dangerous happen?
There were some difficult moments early on, but no one was hurt by the docking spacecraft in orbit. Once all of the tests were finished with Mercury and Gemini, it was time to start the Apollo missions. They required a larger capsule that could carry 3 astronauts at a time. This also meant that the rocket had to be much bigger, since it would also need to carry a second vehicle to actually land on the moon.
The larger rocket you refer to must be the Saturn V, correct, Dr. Jim?
That's right, Vista. The Saturn V was the biggest rocket ever built, even until now. It carried 3 astronauts, a lunar lander, and eventually even a moon buggy all at the same time.
A moon buggy? What's a moon buggy? Was it fast?
The moon buggy was an electrically powered car that the astronauts could drive around on the moon so that they could explore more of the area around the landing sites. However, the first missions didn't carry the moon buggy, and it took several years before the first landing happened.
Did the Apollo program have robotic missions before the moon landings?
Yes, but some of the early Apollo test missions had people, too. In 1967, there was a very unfortunate accident during an early test on the launch pad. Later, that test became known as the Apollo 1 mission in honor of the astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, who were sadly lost in that accident. Because of what happened, people worked very hard to make the Apollo spacecraft much safer. Over the next year or so after that, there were several test flights of the Saturn rocket in Earth orbit, including the Command spacecraft and the lunar lander it would carry to the moon. It was important to check out all of the hardware in space near the Earth before trying a lunar landing. NASA took a lot of time to try to think of everything before sending people to land on the moon.
It appears that the early space flights could be very dangerous, Dr. Jim.
Yes, the Apollo 1 accident nearly stopped the whole program, but people really wanted to meet the challenge that President Kennedy had set and land on the moon before 1970. After the robotic tests showed that the rocket and capsules were okay to work in space and land safely, the Apollo 7 mission took the first astronauts into space on a Saturn rocket.
Did Apollo 7 go to the moon?
No, since they were using a smaller version of the Saturn rocket. For Apollo 8, the full-size Saturn V rocket was used to send astronauts to the moon for the first time in 1968. During this mission, the astronauts saw the far side of the moon, which is not visible from Earth, but they were able to see many small craters as they circled around the moon.
Were there any big craters on the far side of the moon?
Not as large as the ones on the near side, and that remains a bit of a mystery to this day as to why there is such a difference in the sizes of the craters on the two sides of the moon.
So apparently there was enough sunlight on the far side of the moon for them to see the details on the surface?
Yes, Vista, and that's a good clue about the question that we are considering in this show.
Did Apollo 8 land on the moon?
No, they just orbited the moon and took lots of pictures. It was the first time people saw the Earth rising above the horizon of the moon, even though that's really because the Apollo spacecraft was moving so quickly. If you were to stand on the moon's surface, the Earth would appear to stay in about the same place in the sky all the time.
Because the moon always keeps the same face towards the Earth?
Yes, that's right. Later, Apollo 9 tested the lunar module in space, and Apollo 10 did a practice run to the moon with all the equipment that would be needed to land there.
If Apollo 10 had all of the equipment it needed, why didn't they just land on the moon?
That's because NASA was being very careful to take one small step at a time, and they wanted to know that every procedure was going to work before taking the chance to put astronauts down on the moon. Fortunately, everything worked exactly as planned, so it was time to launch Apollo 11 to the moon in July of 1969. Apollo 11 was a success as Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins conducted the first successful landing mission to the moon. There were a total of 6 successful landings before the program ended in 1972 with Apollo 17. However, there were supposed to be 3 more moon landings with Apollo 18, 19, and 20, but the program was canceled early.
That's exactly why Tommy and Laura went back to the moon to find the 6 landing sites and to explore the other parts of the moon where Apollo was supposed to go.
That's right. Let's hear a song about Tommy and Laura as they go back to the moon to find the Apollo landing sites. The song is called "To Follow Apollo," and my friend conductor Arthur will help to get us started with the rolling rocket. Are we ready to go?
Yes, Dr. Jim. All aboard the rolling rocket. It's time for another space adventure with Tommy and Laura. Here we go.
ago we flew the lunar missions to explore. Since that one small step, we haven't been there anymore. Robots fly out to the moon and circle round and round, but kids could land their spaceships there and walk up on the ground. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew. Tommy did a survey of the landing sites of old. Laura found some clues by reading stories that were told. They began to make a plan to visit landing sites and see the famous places all before the lunar night. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew. Astronauts went to the moon and landed there 6 times. Every place was different, they found rocks of many kinds. There were 3 more missions planned, but never got to fly. So now the kids could finish what Apollo dared to try. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew. They came in peace for all mankind and made their mark for kids to find. First they found 6 places where some history was made. Looking from a distance, they could see the way things stayed. Then they planted flags in 3 more places on the moon, and finished for Apollo what had ended far too soon. To follow Apollo around the moon they flew, to find some reminders of spaceships and their crew.
Do you remember the question we were going to think about? The question was, does the moon have a dark side? We heard a clue from Vista, who said that the far side of the moon had enough sunlight for the Apollo 8 astronauts to see the small craters on the surface. So that means that the sun must shine on the far side of the moon sometimes, doesn't it? Even though the far side of the moon is facing away from the Earth all of the time, it is not dark all of the time. The moon orbits around the Earth once per month, and so the sunlight moves around the moon in just the same way that it moves around the Earth between day and night. In other words, every place on the moon has days and nights, just like on the Earth, although they are about 2 weeks long. So the answer is no. The moon does not have a dark side. Just like the Earth, the moon turns around in the sunlight, so it does not have one single side that is always in the dark, and there is no one side of the moon that is in the dark all the time. I'd like to thank my good friends Piper, Vista, and conductor Arthur for joining me today on Space Quest. And you too. Remember, keep your eye on the sky and keep thinking for yourself. I'm Dr. Jim, and I'll see you next time.